March Funeral Homes, located in Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Virginia, is the largest African-American family-owned funeral services company in the United States. In 1976, Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. dedicated a memorial to his son, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at King Memorial Park, which now sits on the March's 155-acre cemetery in Maryland. Victor March Sr. is the president and CEO of March Funeral Homes. He is the son of the late William Carrington March and his mother, the late Julia Roberta March. His father, Mr. March, had the vision more than 60 years ago to build a legacy for his family and for the community. Now, I will say, growing up in Washington, D.C., I was very familiar with March Funeral Homes. As the daughter of a pastor, we knew about the funeral homes in Washington, D.C. So, Mr. March, we are delighted to have you join us today. March Funeral Homes is a household name. It's located right here in our backyard. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. K. I appreciate being with you today.
Yes, can you talk with us a little bit, kind of in the beginning, helping us to understand the legacy of funeral homes to the importance of building the family in the Black community?
Well, great. Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, funeral homes were considered one of the primary businesses within the Black community. It was a profession that did not require a graduate degree, but it elevated the funeral director in a position of prominence within a community, much like a doctor or a lawyer. And so it was a business model that was centered around the community. It served the community, particularly the Black funeral homes only served Black families due to the racism that existed. And to pretty much today, the Black funeral home is probably one of the very few Black businesses that still cater to the Black community. There are really only probably 3 professions left that serve the Black community, and that would be hair care, the Black church, and funeral service. And unfortunately, all 3 of these professions are slowly giving away to the broader community, should I say. So when we talk about segregation and desegregation, a lot of times desegregation was not our friend.
I remember growing up, we would go to a number of funerals. The daughter of a pastor, that was part of the ritual. And going to March funeral homes quite a bit. But my dad once said that when you work with the funeral home, that's a ministry that they do, that it's more than just a job. So can you talk about the ministry that you provide to Black families during this time?
Oh, most definitely. As you indicated, and my father used to always imbue this into all of us, is that this is truly a ministry. It is a calling. It is something that is, that you have been called to serve families in their time of need. You're realizing that for the most part, families are hurting. They've lost a loved one. And as a funeral professional, we're there to help comfort them and help see them through some of the most difficult times in their life. And because of that, it's not everyone is geared to be able to provide that level of support and service to families. It is a ministry. It is, for the most part, it is based in the church. And as you said, with the church and funeral homes, they work collectively together to serve and to help that family through, as I said earlier, the roughest and the toughest hurtful time of their lives as they've lost a loved one. So yes, it is a ministry. You have to be devoted to this. And we've been blessed to have a family that has come together and worked as a family unit as well as a business, I would say, and supporting the bereaved.
Now, your father, if we go back just a little bit to the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
your father was a hard worker.
Mm-hmm.
We know the stories of since he was a young child, with the Great Depression starting in the United States in the late 1920s, being such a difficult economic time. Like your father started selling newspapers when he was 10 years old.
Yeah.
And went to Baltimore City. Talk a little bit about the choices that he made to get you where you are at this moment with the family business.
Thank you. Well, my father, as you said earlier, started working at the age of 10, during the Depression to help support the family. But more importantly, he was working to help raise bus fare from his older sister to go to school. My parents were very strong on education in school. And of course, they always had aspirations of going to college, but realizing that that was not going to happen. He wanted to be an architect, but he realized that he wasn't going to be able to afford to go to college to be an architect. And while he was, my dad was in the Battle of Normandy. So he fought in the Battle of Normandy, which we know is one of the most horrific battles of all military history. He made a pledge with him and 3 other of his soldiers that if they ever made it back home alive, that they were going to use the GI Bill to go into funeral service. As I said before earlier, the funeral home was deemed one of the prominent, prestigious businesses in the community. And they made a pledge to themselves that that's what they were going to do. Unfortunately, my father was the only one who fulfilled that pledge. They made it home alive. He went to mortuary school. But the reason my parents went into business was to be able to educate their children. They wanted to make sure that they were able to provide an education that they themselves were not able to have. And so going into business was one of the ways that they felt that they could support. Now, keep in mind, my dad worked 30 years at the post office at night while working his own personal funeral service during the day. So he and my mom were a team during the day and he worked at night. And so that went on for 30 years as he continued to struggle to build his business and to be able to afford an education for their children. And they were able to send their kids to, I guess, the best schools that they could. But it was no doubt in our minds that we were going to college. As children, we were going to college. And so that was what inspired my parents to go into business. And that's what built the legacy that we have today.
So I know that you were one of 4 siblings, Erica, Cynthia, Nat, and all of you decided to join the family business. Now, I want to pull that apart just a little bit because one of the ways that we know that you build generational wealth is to keep the people who come in the next generation working in the family business. It doesn't get sold off. So talk about the way in which your father and your mother laid that legacy in you to continue with the family business. And are you then planting that seed in the next generation, in your children?
Yes, thank you. Well, as I said earlier, my parents, when we were young, involved us in the family business. From the age of 8, I can remember having some level of responsibility that we had within our family business. We lived right over top of the funeral home. So we lived where we worked. And we had assignments. And my parents never gave us an allowance, but they paid us for what we did. So if you did not do, you did not get paid. So, I mean, there were small amounts, but they basically encouraged us to work within the family unit. And we were all one. It was hard to separate the family from the business. They were so intertwined and interconnected that each of us played some role. My brother and I, when we got old enough, we made removals. We delivered chairs to families' houses. In Baltimore, we had the marble steps. We had the scrub steps. We had brass railings that we had to polish the railings. We had to vacuum. We had to move flowers. We had to move chairs around. We had to, clean bathrooms. This was all part of the family and also all part of the business. But the one thing that I have to credit my parents for was that as we got older, they did not force us to come into the business.
Mm.
They encouraged us to pursue our own dreams and our own interests. Um, so when we went to college, um, our parents, encouraged us to do our own thing. So both of my sisters, Annette and Cynthia, they're Cynthia's the oldest, Annette is the youngest of the four children. They both went to nursing school.
Mm.
And they were both nurses working within Hopkins and University of Maryland systems. My brother Eric, he did go to Johns Hopkins. He majored in psychology and creative writing. Myself, my dad encouraged me to go into accounting. And the reason he did was that in my high school, I was the one that was kind of taking care of all the books, paying bills, paying the vendors, doing payroll and things of that nature. And my dad said, Vic, why don't you consider being a CPA? I'm
Mm.
like, a CPA? Why? He says, do you realize, he said, that at that time, he said less than 2% of all the CPAs in the United States are African American. He said, you need to consider that.
Mm.
And I did. And so I went to school. I graduated with a degree in accounting, and I was blessed. At the time, there were the big eight accounting firms, where these were the international accounting firms all over the world. There was only eight of them. And I was honored to be given an offer to work for each of the big eight
Wow.
accounting firms. And so I selected Coopers and Lybrand, which at the time was the number one firm in the world. And I was able to work with some major clients, Ford, C&P Telephone, which is now Verizon, USF&G Insurance Company, Alcolac, which makes all the Gillette products. So I had a great brain. But the reason I was getting to that point was that we all realized that ultimately we were coming back to the family business. But in coming back to the family business, we were now bringing all of the things that we had learned in our careers. We had brought back all those experiences back to the family business, and we're able to continue the growth of the family business with our own personal experiences. And I've continued that with our own children in the third generation. Each of the third generation, no one can come directly into the family business. They all have to go out. They all have to get their college degrees. They all have to fly on their own. But if they decide that the family business is where they want to be, then God willing, come on back to the family business. And I would have to say that we've got three of the third generation that is in the business on a full-time basis. Both of my children are actively working in the business full-time. My daughter has a degree in advertising and art, and she runs 3 of our funeral homes. By the way, there's 9 members of the family. All 9 are licensed morticians, which means we're licensed funeral directors and embalmers. So everyone went back to school, to mortuary school, to get our mortuary license to continue the legacy that my parents first started.
Well, Victor Marsh, what a wonderful legacy it is. I feel like Marsh Funeral Homes, for those of us in DC, we knew exactly what that was like. And here in Baltimore, they know you are the epitome of Black Wall Street and what it means to build a Black family. And so I just want to say on behalf of the families in DC and Maryland that we thank your father for his vision, and we thank your family for your ministry to us during our time of need. Thank you for that.
Thank you so very much. It is an honor, and I accept certainly the thanks, and I just thank everyone for your continued well wishes and support, and allowing us to serve your families in time of need.
Marsh Funeral Homes is located in Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Virginia. It's the largest African-American family-owned funeral services company in the United States. Just saying that. It just keeps me in awe thinking about your father selling newspapers at the age of 10, but building up a business that has survived and is being sustained through the love and care of your own family. Victor Marsh Sr. is the president and CEO of Marsh Funeral Homes. Thank you so much for your work, sir.
Thank you so very much, Dr. K. I appreciate it.